They laughed while I washed their dishes. Not a polite chuckle. Not a quick joke to lighten the room. It was a full, deep-bellied laugh, like I was the entertainment at Thanksgiving dinner. Except the joke was my life. I stood there at the sink, my hands plunged into cloudy water, scrubbing plates that weren't even mine, pretending not to hear. I had gotten good at pretending that it didn't bother me when they piled their dishes in front of me without a thank you, pretending that it didn't sting when my mother, Margot, barked orders like I was the hired help, pretending that my sister Vanessa hadn't spent the last hour making little comments about how I was still stuck and always would be, but pretending didn't stop the sharp twist in my gut when Vanessa called out across the kitchen, "She's just a servant in her own life." Her voice carried across the living room. I saw heads turn. I heard the laughter. And then, worse, I heard my mother's voice, smooth and approving. Her kid probably feels the same. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The dish I was scrubbing slipped slightly in my grip. My heart pounded against my ribs so loudly it drowned out the clatter of forks and the murmurs of family catching up over pumpkin pie. I felt like I was standing completely alone in that house, invisible, a ghost at my own family's table. I swallowed hard and kept scrubbing. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Let me tell you about the people standing in that room. My mother, Margot, has never been the nurturing type. Growing up, praise from her was rare, and affection even rarer. She believed in tough love, heavy on the tough. I spent most of my childhood trying to earn her approval. Straight A's, scholarships, a spotless record, but it was never enough. My sister Vanessa had a different approach. She stopped trying. Instead, she learned how to tear other people down before they could judge her. Sarcastic, beautiful, sharp-tongued, Vanessa never missed a chance to remind me that I was the charity case, the mistake, the single mom who stayed behind while everyone else moved forward. And then there was Caleb, my son, my whole world. 17 years old, taller than me now, with his father's stubborn jaw and my eyes. I raised him on my own after his father left before Caleb's second birthday. I gave up a lot. College dreams, career plans, even simple things like vacations or nights out, so I could be there for him, so I could keep a roof over our heads, so he could grow up knowing he was loved, even if it was just the two of us. It wasn't the life I had pictured, but it was ours, and I had built it with my own 2 hands. I took a shaky breath and kept scrubbing. The laughter faded into other conversations. People moved on, already forgetting that they had just laughed at me like I was a joke, an afterthought, a living cautionary tale. But then, the front door creaked open. I heard the familiar sound of Caleb's boots on the floor. He was back. I wiped my hands quickly on a dish towel and turned, forcing a smile. I was ready to ask if he had a good time with his friends, or if he was hungry, always putting him first, just like I always had. But Caleb didn't smile. He walked straight toward me, a slim folder tucked under one arm. His jaw was set. His eyes, my eyes, burned with something fierce, something determined. He stopped in front of me, glanced around the room at the people still lounging with wine glasses and half-eaten pie slices, and said, clear enough for everyone to hear, "Mom, should I give them the paper from the lawyer now?" The room froze. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Chatter evaporated into stunned silence. I felt every pair of eyes turn to me, not with pity, not with amusement, but with confusion, and maybe a little fear. I straightened up slowly, the damp dish towel hanging from my hand. I looked at Caleb, at the boy who had become a man right in front of me. And for the first time all night, I smiled. Not the tired, polite smile they were used to, but a real one. I nodded. "Yes, Caleb," I said, my voice steady. "Go ahead." And just like that, everything changed. Thanksgiving at my mother's house was never about gratitude. It was about appearances. The table was set with spotless silverware and ivory white dishes. Candles flickered at the center, surrounded by polished pumpkins and fall leaves carefully arranged to look casual, even though Margot spent hours perfecting them. Everything smelled of cinnamon, butter, and a kind of forced perfection that always made me feel like an outsider. I had been here for barely an hour and already found myself cornered in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, wrists deep in greasy water. As usual, no one offered to help. No one even hesitated before dropping their half-eaten plates into the sink with a clatter, as if it was my job, my place, to clean up after them. It wasn't that I hated helping. I was raised to pull my weight, to lend a hand without being asked. But this wasn't helping. This was expected servitude, handed down like an invisible apron I was supposed to wear without complaint. Around me, the house buzzed with the sounds of a holiday celebration. Uncle Frank telling another one of his back-in-my-day stories. Aunt Cheryl laughing too loud at something no one else found funny. My cousins, fresh from college, comparing internships and travel plans. Even the toddlers screaming happily in the next room seemed to have more status than I did. I glanced over my shoulder at the living room. There they were. Margot perched on her velvet couch, a glass of red wine balanced perfectly in her hand, her legs crossed at the ankle like a queen overseeing her court. Next to her, my sister Vanessa, blonde and sharp as a knife, flipping through her phone with one hand while sipping wine with the other. They looked so relaxed, so sure of their place in the world. Meanwhile, I scrubbed dried gravy off plates and fought the sinking feeling that no matter how hard I worked, I would always be seen as less. Growing up, I used to think if I followed all the rules, if I stayed polite, stayed kind, stayed useful, eventually they'd see me, see how much I carried, see how much I sacrificed. But standing there with prune-like hands and an aching back, I realized that some people only see what they want to see. And in their eyes, I was a failure with no ambitions, a maid in my own family. The truth was, my life hadn't gone the way I imagined. I had dreams once, big ones. I wanted to travel, to build a career, maybe even write a book. But then Caleb came along and everything shifted. I was 19 when I had him, terrified, alone. The father disappeared faster than the pregnancy test could dry, leaving me to face Margot's cold disapproval and the relentless whisper network of our small town. People love to remind you of your mistakes when they think you're too tired to fight back, but Caleb was never a mistake. He was my anchor, my reason, my miracle. Every choice I made after that day was for him. I worked double shifts at diners. I took online classes at midnight. I skipped dinners and birthdays and vacations so I could save for his future. And yet here I was, 20 years later, still being laughed at by the people who were supposed to love me the most. The clang of silverware snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned just in time to see Vanessa toss her plate into the sink, splashing greasy water onto my sweater. She didn't even look at me. "Oops," she said, smiling sweetly before turning back to the living room. I clenched the edge of the sink, breathing deep through my nose. That's when she said it, loudly enough for everyone to hear. She's just a servant in her own life. A ripple of laughter rolled through the room like a slow wave, crashing straight into me. I stiffened, still facing the sink, hoping, praying that someone would speak up, that someone would say, "That's not fair," or "Don't be cruel," or "She's family." But nobody did. And Margot, my own mother, leaned back on the couch with a smug little smirk and added, "Her kid probably feels the same. Poor thing." I blinked hard, willing the tears back. Not here, not in front of them. The shame was familiar, an old heavy coat I never quite managed to shrug off. But today, it felt different. Today, it wasn't just sadness that burned in my chest. It was something hotter, angrier. And just as that fire began to smolder inside me, the front door creaked open. Boots scraped against the floorboards. Heads turned lazily toward the entryway. It was Caleb, 17 years old and walking in like he owned the world, a slim, serious-looking folder tucked under one arm. And he wasn't smiling. Something was about to change. I could feel it. And this time, I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine. The moment Caleb walked through the door, the atmosphere shifted. He didn't storm in. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, straight-backed, calm, almost eerily composed. That's what made everyone pause. He wasn't supposed to interrupt the show, not their version of it anyway. In their eyes, I was the struggling single mom, the family's cautionary tale. And Caleb? Caleb was supposed to grow up embarrassed of me, embarrassed of the life I had built with worn-out hands and sleepless nights. They didn't understand what we had built together. They never even tried. Caleb's eyes found mine across the room. He took one look at the dirty dish towel clutched in my hands, at my wet sleeves, at the silent tear tracks I hadn't even realized were starting to form, and something in his expression hardened. He shifted the folder under his arm and started walking, right past the aunts gossiping by the fireplace, past the cousins sneaking beers out of the fridge, past Vanessa, who gave him a half smirk before realizing he wasn't joking. He walked straight to me, and then, loud enough for the whole room to hear, he asked, "Mom, should I give them the paper from the lawyer now?" You could have heard a pin drop. Margot lowered her wine glass slowly. Vanessa stopped scrolling on her phone, her thumb hovering mid-air. Even Uncle Frank, who could talk through a hurricane, went silent. I glanced around the room, 15 faces staring. Not at Caleb, at me, waiting for me to shrink, to stammer, to brush it off, to do what I had always done, make myself small so they could stay comfortable. Not this time. I looked at Caleb, my son, my anchor, and I nodded. "Yes, Caleb," I said, my voice steady. "Go ahead." Caleb opened the folder and pulled out a few neatly stapled documents. He stepped forward and held them out, first to Margot, then to Vanessa. Margot took the papers with a frown, holding them at arm's length like they might bite. Vanessa leaned in, curiosity burning hotter than her usual boredom. They scanned the first page, their faces twisted almost in unison. Margot's eyes darted back to me, full of confusion and dawning fear. Vanessa's mouth dropped open, a soft little gasp escaping before she snapped it shut. Around us, the family shifted nervously. No one understood yet, but they could smell the smoke, and they knew a fire was about to roar through their perfect little party. "What is this?" Margot asked, her voice sharp and cracking at the edges. I wiped my hands dry on the towel, dropped it on the counter, and turned to face them fully. For once, I stood tall. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain myself away. I let the weight of the truth settle over the room like a thundercloud ready to break. "It's the paperwork from the lawyer," I said simply, "finalizing the ownership transfer." Margot's eyebrows pulled together. "What ownership transfer?" Caleb answered for me, his voice as clear and firm as I had ever heard it. "The house," he said. "This house. Grandma signed over co-ownership to Mom years ago when she had those financial problems. She just didn't tell anyone. Mom owns half now, and when Grandma's gone..." He shrugged slightly. "The rest will be hers, too." The words hung there, heavy and electric. You could almost hear the gears grinding in their heads, the realization crashing into them like a tidal wave. All this time, they had treated me like a maid in a house I partly owned. All this time, they had mocked me, sneered at me, while eating at a table that was, legally and rightfully, half mine. I felt a strange calmness wash over me, like a warm current pulling me free from years of drowning. Margot was pale now, gripping the papers so tightly her knuckles turned white. Vanessa took a shaky step back, as if distance could undo the words she just heard. From the corner of the room, Aunt Cheryl whispered something to Uncle Frank. The cousins stared wide-eyed, their plates forgotten. No one was laughing now, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the help. I didn't feel like the mistake. I felt like someone who had just stopped asking for a seat at the table, because it was already mine. Caleb smiled at me, a quiet, knowing smile, the kind that said, "You don't have to fight them alone anymore." And deep down, I knew. They might have seen me as invisible before, but after today, they would never forget me again. The papers sat there in Margot's lap, heavy and undeniable, like a stone dropped into a still pond, but instead of ripples, there was only stunned silence. I stood there, my hands finally dry, the towel abandoned behind me. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to fix something, smooth something over, apologize for simply existing. I had spent so long shrinking myself down, trying not to be a burden, that standing tall felt almost foreign. But it also felt good. No, it felt right. Margot cleared her throat sharply, the sound slicing through the silence like a blade. "Elara," she started, her voice tight. "You can't possibly think—" I didn't let her finish. I took one small step forward, not aggressive, but firm. It wasn't just a step across the living room, it was a step across years of shame and belittlement. I met her eyes directly. Something I hadn't done since I was a teenager, still desperate for her approval. I wasn't desperate anymore. I wasn't asking for anything. I was stating something. "It's not about what I think, Mom," I said calmly. "It's what's already been done. Legally. Officially." A few of the relatives exchanged uneasy glances. Someone coughed awkwardly. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly across her chest, her face pulled into a scowl. "You tricked her," Vanessa hissed suddenly, her voice rising. "You manipulated her when she was vulnerable." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my voice level. "Manipulated her?" I repeated. "Mom's the one who came to me. Remember those years when she couldn't pay the property taxes? When the bank was about to foreclose? She asked me for help, and I helped." I turned slightly, letting my gaze sweep the room, making sure everyone understood. "I helped her save this house, the one you're all sitting in right now." The silence that followed wasn't just stunned anymore. It was guilty. Margot flinched, just a tiny movement, but I caught it. A crack in her perfect, imperious mask. "We're family," she muttered, but there was no conviction behind the words. I tilted my head, considering her for a moment. "Exactly," I said. "We're family, and family shouldn't treat each other like servants." A heavy, aching pause filled the room. For the first time, I could see it, the way my mother's need for control had hollowed out every relationship she had. The way Vanessa's cruelty was just a cheap imitation of Margot's disapproval. The way the whole family dynamic was built on pretending some of us were better, more important than others. I wasn't playing that game anymore, and judging by the look on Caleb's face, neither was he. "Mom," Caleb said, stepping up beside me, "you always told me to work hard, to stand up for myself. Well, here we are." There it was. Simple and devastating. The lesson she had preached but never practiced, coming back to haunt her from her own grandson's mouth. Margot's lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. Vanessa turned away, muttering something under her breath. The younger cousins watched with wide eyes, probably realizing for the first time that grown-ups weren't infallible after all. I could feel the shift happening, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. The unspoken rules of our family, the ones that kept me locked in place for decades, were crumbling, and I wasn't going to pick up the pieces. I let the moment stretch, forcing everyone to sit in their discomfort the way I had been made to sit in mine for years. Finally, I spoke again, my voice low but cutting through the room like a blade. "From now on, if you want me here, if you want Caleb here, you'll treat us with respect. Like family, not servants, not mistakes, and if you can't do that—" I shrugged lightly, as if the decision didn't matter to me anymore. "We won't be back." A ripple of shocked gasps filled the room, not because it was a threat, but because they knew I meant it. I had always stayed before, always bit my tongue, always cleaned up their messes, both literal and emotional. Not anymore. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a declaration. I was done asking for space. I was taking it. Behind me, Caleb shifted closer, a silent show of solidarity. I felt his presence like a shield at my back. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't alone. I never had been. I just had to finally believe it. There are moments in life that feel so sharp, so crystal clear, you know even as they're happening that you'll remember every detail forever. This was one of them. I stood there, Caleb by my side, watching my family fumble with the truth they had so carefully ignored for years. The truth that I wasn't the burden they thought, the truth that I wasn't powerless, the truth that I had been holding more together than they ever realized. And now, there was no denying it. Margot looked down at the papers again like she could will the words to change. Vanessa stared at me with a look I couldn't quite name, something between disbelief and fear. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. "This must be a mistake," Margot said finally, her voice brittle, almost breaking. "There's no way—" Caleb didn't let her finish. "It's not a mistake," he said, his voice steady and cold. The documents are registered with the county. The lawyer double-checked everything before Thanksgiving, just in case you tried to fight it. You could feel the air suck right out of the room. Aunt Cheryl's eyes widened like saucers. Uncle Frank muttered something under his breath and took a big swig of his beer. Even the teenagers stopped pretending to be glued to their phones and stared at us. Margot's face twisted, a cocktail of anger, embarrassment, and something she would never admit: fear. For once, she didn't have a script ready. No quick, cutting remark, no scathing lecture. She had lost control. "You didn't tell us because you knew we'd never agree to it," Vanessa snapped, her voice rising with every word. "You tricked everyone." I tilted my head slightly, almost amused. "No," I said softly. "I just stopped asking for permission." There was a difference, a big one, and they were finally starting to understand it. I took a few slow steps forward, letting my heels click against the hardwood floor, letting the sound fill the silence they had once used to drown me out. I stopped in front of the coffee table, the centerpiece of Margot's perfectly curated living room. Gently, almost casually, I set the final page from Caleb's folder on the table, a copy of the updated title deed. In black and white, no arguments left, no loopholes to twist. My name printed clearly alongside Margot's, and the clause Caleb had made sure the lawyer included. Upon Margot's passing, full ownership transferred immediately to Alara Jensen. No contest, no delay. It was done. Set in stone. Irrevocable. I turned back to the room and took a deep breath. No trembling, no fear. "You called me a servant," I said, my voice low but carrying through every corner of the room. "You laughed at me like I was nothing. You taught your kids and grandkids to treat me like background noise, like wallpaper." I looked directly at Margot, who was staring at the floor now. "But here's the thing," I said, my words slicing clean. "The servant you mocked? She owns the house you're sitting in." Vanessa's face flushed red. Margot's shoulders sagged slightly, the fight draining out of her. The victory didn't taste like revenge. It tasted like freedom. Not because I had won, but because I had finally stopped playing by their rules. I glanced at Caleb, who nodded once at me, pride shining clear in his eyes. For everything I had given up, for every lonely night, for every moment I doubted myself, this made it worth it. Not the house, not the inheritance, but the fact that Caleb saw me, respected me, loved me. And he wasn't afraid to stand beside me and say it out loud, no matter who was listening. The room stayed frozen for a few long, heavy seconds. No one moved. No one spoke. Finally, Margot stood up slowly, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "We should eat," she said, her voice hollow, brittle. "The food's getting cold." Like nothing had happened, like the foundation of her little empire hadn't just cracked open. But it didn't matter, because something had shifted. Permanently. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that house an hour ago. I wasn't the maid or the mistake or the charity case. I was Alara Jensen, homeowner, mother, warrior. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt invincible. After the confrontation, the rest of Thanksgiving passed in a strange, uneasy quiet. No one made any more jokes. No one ordered me back into the kitchen. In fact, for the first time I could remember, no one asked me to do anything at all. It was almost funny in a bitter way. All these years I had bent over backward for this family. And it took one sheet of paper, one undeniable truth, to make them finally treat me like I mattered. The food sat cooling on the sideboard. People picked half-heartedly at their plates, conversations stilted and full of forced smiles. The festive spirit was gone, drained away like dirty water slipping down a sink. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I didn't apologize. I sat down at the table across from Caleb and quietly ate my meal. And for the first time in my life, I felt no shame, no guilt, just peace. In the days that followed, the ripples continued to spread. Some family members, like Aunt Cheryl and Uncle Frank, reached out with awkward, fumbling apologies. Messages that sounded more like obligations than real remorse. "We didn't know, Alara. If we had known, we would have treated you differently." As if ownership of property should have been the prerequisite for respect. I didn't answer all of them. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Vanessa stayed silent for a while. No texts, no calls. When she finally did message me, it was short and sour. "Congrats. Hope you're happy." I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, not anymore, but because I was done explaining my worth to people determined not to see it. And Margot? Well, Margot did what she always did, pretended everything was fine. When I dropped by to handle some joint paperwork a week later, she talked about the weather, the price of turkey, the neighbor's dog, anything except the elephant still standing between us. But the way she looked at me had changed. There was a flicker of something new in her eyes when she spoke to me now. Not love, maybe not even true respect, but recognition. She couldn't ignore me anymore. She couldn't rewrite my story to fit her comfort. I had stepped out of the role she assigned me, and no amount of denial could shove me back inside it. The real change, though, wasn't in them. It was in me. For so long, I thought I needed their approval. I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed kind enough, carried enough of their burdens, someday they would turn around and say, "We see you. We're proud." But that moment never came, and now, standing on the other side of it all, I realized I didn't need it. I had my own pride, my own peace, and most importantly, I had Caleb, my beautiful, stubborn, brilliant son who saw my worth clearer than anyone else ever had. That night, after the tension of Thanksgiving had finally bled out into silence and we were back home, Caleb knocked on my bedroom door. "Hey, Mom," he said, stepping in awkwardly, shuffling his feet like he was still that little boy asking permission to stay up 5 more minutes. "Yeah, sweetheart?" I smiled, already feeling the lump in my throat. He sat on the edge of the bed, twisting the hem of his hoodie in his hands. "I'm sorry it took me so long to do something," he said, his voice low. "I should have stood up for you sooner." Tears prickled my eyes. I reached out and cupped his cheek, my thumb brushing the line of his strong jaw. "You stood up exactly when you needed to," I said. "You reminded me who I am." He smiled then, a real, wide Caleb smile, and leaned into my hand like he did when he was small. And I realized something else. This was my legacy. Not a house, not a title. It was the quiet, unbreakable bond between us. The lesson I had taught him, not through words, but through living. That worth isn't something other people give you. It's something you claim for yourself. I tucked that truth deep into my heart, letting it heal the parts of me that had been aching for years. The next time I showed up at a family gathering, if I even chose to, I wouldn't be standing at a sink, scrubbing dishes while they laughed. I'd be standing tall, standing proud, standing free. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't loud or cruel. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply surviving, thriving, and refusing to disappear. And that's exactly what I plan to do. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, if it made you feel something, even just a little, please give this video a like. It helps more people hear stories like mine. And if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or like you had to fight just to be seen, I'd love to hear your story too. Share it in the comments below. I read every one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, send it their way. You never know. Your share could be the thing that lifts someone up when they need it most. Thanks for being here. Thanks for believing in stories that matter. I'll see you in the next one.